Welcome to the stage, Chief Growth Officer of Ara, Courtney Boyd Myers, and co-founder and co-CEO of Seed Health, Ara Katz.
Hello, good morning. All right, who took their seed probiotic last night? Raise your hand.
Not that many.
I definitely did, yes. Excellent poops this morning, held by everyone. Guys, I am so excited to be interviewing Ara Katz today. I've been following her career for a very long time. She's someone who has always been at this amazing intersection between innovation and design, education, storytelling, and science. She's also been a part of the Summit community for longer than I have, which is very hard to say. Since 2010, she went to Summit DC, which is pretty cool. So we're honored to have her on stage with us today. Is this your first time speaking at Summit?
No, I spoke in Ojai.
Okay, great. So yeah, we're honored to be diving into Ara's career path, her journey onwards from seed, and also just learning all about the microbiome today. So start with a little gut check. How are you feeling to be here today and sharing your story of seed with this audience?
You know, it's interesting, like when Brett called me to speak, it was I didn't necessarily anticipate like how full circle this would feel. When I went to Summit in DC in 2010, we were babies.
Yeah.
We were literally babies. We didn't have our life partners. We weren't parents. We were early in many of our careers. The stories I could tell you from DC are quite different from what Summit is today. And actually there were nowhere near as many women.
Yeah.
And I know that there's been such a conscious effort, you know, and actually having Robin speak about female longevity is like, Summit's come a really long way in that way, and it's full circle and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I also think it's a reminder too, like I think just looking at the programming, and I was like, you know, where else, there aren't many places in the world where you can experience these full body, intentional places that have been curated with so much love and thought. And so I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah. Well, you don't have one gray hair on your head, I'll just say, from up close, but it is amazing watching your friends, and everyone looks the same, but then you start to notice a little more, you know, salt and pepper flakes. So,
that's a different panel. We could talk about the science of that.
Yes. Does taking seed prevent gray hairs? I mean, so let's sign me up.
I have no data to support that.
Wow. Yeah, I want to do whatever you are doing. So when I first took notice of Ara Katz, she was the co-founder of one of the hottest New York City startups. And then, you know, you moved to LA. I guess you were in New York at that point. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, Seed was on my LinkedIn, was on my Instagram, was on my radar. And it was so subtle in the way you were building it, like the sort of infographics and everything. You knew this really exciting thing was happening. So like, you know, just my last joke, but like, how did you feel in your gut that the microbiome was your true calling here?
I mean, so just to take like a longer step back than my last startup, my mom died when I was 16 of pancreatic cancer. And that was when I started reading. I remember being in my high school computer lab, and I actually started reading and researching clinical trials. And that was when I learned to read scientific papers. And I remember being fascinated by the space between how science happens and how it makes its way to humans, and how we learn about our biology. Because I think, and especially for women, but for most people in general, we come into our bodies and our biology when we get either sick or knocked up. It's like pathology or pregnancy is the things, especially for women, when I think you tend to learn, or, you know, a big life phase change. And so I spent the rest of, I mean, many people didn't know this about me, but like my science nerdness and my love of biology like started then. But for some reason, and you know, you sometimes look back, you don't know how these things kind of happen, but I didn't end up becoming a scientist, and I didn't end up becoming a doctor. My sister did. She's a radiation oncologist, just made the New York Times honorary like rising star list. Very, very proud of her. And I think that I had always been curious, and I think when I watched my mom, literally it was 361 days from diagnosis to death. And when you watch a parent, and you watch any kind of physical body go through that, I think, and you look for how people, my mom actually had worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is one of the best, ironically, best cancer hospitals in the world. And I always, at that very young age, very much believed of all the things I was reading. And actually my mom being like a long-term yogi, and she'd be like doing this like new chemo drug, but then like Reiki practitioners would come through the house. And when you're dying, you grasp at pretty much anything, and you'll try anything, no matter whether there's clinical evidence, peer-reviewed research, randomized controlled trials. And I remember feeling so clearly that we were missing so much of the picture. And I remember feeling like I would read scientific papers and I was like, this can't be all we know. And it's not, of course, science is always unfolding, and this was actually prior to like sequencing the human genome and a lot of the technologies and things we understand and know today. But I deeply had this feeling that something was like big and missing. And certainly like Eastern modalities fill in some of that. There was some talk, a lot of Eastern modalities talked about the gut. And so that was one of the first times I had ever even heard that. And this was in 1997. Flash forward, and I didn't just like leave my last startup. I wasn't living in New York. I was actually living in LA and killing myself bi-coastally for a mobile commerce company. And I had a miscarriage. And I actually think they're biological miracles, and it was a really very beautiful and pivotal experience, because not only was the life that was living inside of me not viable, and my biology understood that, but the life I was living was fundamentally not viable. And it was not what I wanted to be doing. I was living totally out of alignment with things I care about. I'm very proud of some of the tech stuff I've done, but and on paper it looks sexy and you get added to lists. But I've spent a lot of my life really trying to run away from ego, not towards it. And it was really the microbiome was fascinating, because I had my miscarriage. I wrote a letter to my co-founders, which in tech, I had two male co-founders. Women in tech, it's like you don't like leave companies you found, and it was I had a lot of shame and feelings about doing it. And I said, I need to create the life that's viable. 3 months later, I was pregnant again, and I met my co-founder. And he had been tracking the microbiome since 2006. There were like 2 seminal mouse studies that had come out, like all good new areas of science. When they can show you that you can look younger and lose weight, that's when they get a lot of attention. So these little mice started to have, you would take a microbiome from a lean mouse, put it in an obese mouse. Obese mouse got lean mouse got obese, and they were like, oh shit, like now it's important. And obviously it was around the time also, just after the Human Microbiome Project the Human Genome Project had happened, so we started to actually have like tools and sequencing technologies to actually look at these cells in a much higher resolution. And so he had been tracking and been very interested in the microbiome. And when you get pregnant and you start to understand the role of the microbiome in a developing infant, prenatally, of course, at birth, and those first kind of 3 to 4, 5 years of life, when your microbiome is forming, and you understand that is correlated and so clearly connected to someone's health trajectory for life, I started to really feel that, the microbiome is 50% of the cells in our body are not human. 50% of them. And so when I go back to that feeling I had when I was 16, that something really big was missing, for me, the microbiome was that, like, one of those missing pieces. And, of the 38 trillion microbes that live in our bodies, everything that we know and do and see until the science started to accelerate was really based on just our human cells. And so I think that felt to me like it was a frontier to run towards.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for that answer. Now the room is really filled out, and so I do want to just set the stage, in case people are a little unfamiliar with the microbiome, that there's also a vaginal microbiome and a skin microbiome and a mouth. So yeah, just if you could give us a primer before we dive into this talk, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's really important, because microbiome is a word that's misused all the time, and for actually good reason. Most people think the microbiome is just your gut, but actually the microbiome is really collectively all of the microbes, and actually, if you scientific definition, is all the genes and even metabolites that they are creating. And so microbes are, predominantly bacteria, but it also includes things like fungi and archaea and even viruses and phages. And so when we talk about the microbiome in more like mainstream health, we're really predominantly talking about bacteria today, although there's areas of research that are interesting in some of the other microbes. And it really is the collection of microbes that live in and on our bodies. The gut microbiome is the area that has gotten the most attention and where the science has kind of been the most advanced. And it's also the densest and largest microbiome of our body, and one of the most complex, thousands of species of bacteria. After the gut microbiome, the oral microbiome with about 700 plus different species of microbes is the next most kind of complex. And then after that, of course, we have our skin, and we have areas like the vaginal microbiome, there's an optical microbiome, there's a nasal microbiome, there's an axial microbiome in your armpits, you have microbes in your belly button, and then of course the skin microbiome, which varies also depending on what part of your body you're talking about. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, wow, so helpful. Okay, I want to go back to when you were talking about having your first child while building Seed. No small feat, by the way, and just also how you talked about the importance of those like kind of early years in building a child's microbiome. Talk to us a little bit about how being a mom and pregnancy, you said it was one of the two things that kind of shifted your relationship with your body and made you more aware of things. And then I'll just sort of add in another question, which is the children's microbiome piece. Romy, our daughter, just turned 3. I bought her the Seed probiotics. Hard to get her to drink anything, really, but yeah, just a little bit about mom. What?
You can put it in yogurt.
Oh, that is great. Yeah, she loves yogurt. So yeah, talk to us a little about like pregnancy, motherhood, early childhood, and just what you've learned through this process.
Yeah, and well, our name Seed comes from seeding, which is the biological process by which an infant first acquires their foundational microbes, and the process by which your microbiome progresses and develops. And when we started Seed, actually I was pregnant, and I don't know how many women here have had children, but for some reason, your creativity is like off the charts. You're like, I'm gonna start this company, I'm gonna do this, and then you realize I probably wouldn't wanna be doing that 3 years from now. You have a new idea for a baby stroller, how you're gonna improve every single gadget that comes with being pregnant and having children. But this was, when we started Seed, we really started it to reinvent infant formula. That was really the original idea. And a lot of that research, actually, we have all that research that we've done, and we're in the process of licensing that to a company who is very well suited to be able to scale that.
Cool.
But the idea was a couple of things. One was, how could we optimize these early windows of life? So if you could actually prime and shape an infant's microbiome from birth and optimize it to have all of the characteristics that we know, at least from the science today, where we actually do have longitudinal data in some cases, where it is not correlated with the best health outcomes. And one of the exciting things, we've got to work with some scientists who have one of the largest and richest human data sets that exists in the world out of Israel. And we started to look at the microbiome of centenarians and started to say, what would it look like to look at the species that are most present in centenarians and start to look at these early windows of life and say, what would it mean to set a microbiome up to be mirroring and looking like early the people who have obviously the best health outcomes in the world. And that was really one of our original ideas, which was, how do you optimize that early window of development?
That makes so much sense to me. And I mean, you have DSO1, the core probiotic, which I think most of you are familiar with. You have a vaginal probiotic, and we now have the sort of 3 and up children's probiotic. You're doing the formula sort of licensing, which is really cool. Talk to us about this multi-ohm system, if you will, why we need to be supplementing and supporting our microbiome with all of these things, and also maybe what's next in terms of the product development at Seed.
Yeah, I mean, the microbiome is so exciting. This is where I'm the worst salesperson in the world, and I know you were giving me a real hook to try and sell, but the microbiome, the reason it's so exciting is that, we have we kind of have a joke at Seed, you can go to Whole Foods and you can't buy anything for your genome, but I could take you through every single aisle of a Whole Foods or a pharmacy and explain how different things that you could buy or consume or in your daily life could positively impact or negatively impact your microbiome. And it is one of the core, and I think there's really exciting things coming, so I don't want to seem like it's the only one, but it is as a frontier of health where we have so much agency from early windows of life to how we raise our children, the choices we make, the micro choices we make all day and every single day in our lives. Not things that are dissimilar to any of the things you hear in wellness, well-being, like how we eat, sleep, hydrate, exercise, move. And so, probiotics, biotics in general, probiotics, which is live microbes, prebiotics, which are really the substrates or food sources that microbes use to create positive, either feed beneficial bacteria or allow bacteria to kind of biotransform them into other metabolites. Robin mentioned urolithin A as an example. There's butyrate, there's other examples. And then there's postbiotics, and now there's parabiotics and psychobiotics. And, there's a whole world of biotics that certainly are like extraordinary. I think particularly the ones that are doing the work and doing the science and having specificity and precision being created and with a lot of integrity scientifically are an extraordinary lever. There's many probiotics that will be approved as drugs. In women's health, the opportunity to transplant and create the optimal vaginal microbiome is going to be massive for reproductive, urogenital, and gynecological health. But the microbiome as a lever of health is extraordinary. A lot of the things that are being talked about today, inflammation and what happens when you're dysbiotic, when your gut is dysbiotic, and the cascade of things, and everyone's looking now at root causes and really wanting to get out of symptom management. And when we think about both prediction, prevention, and even and of course intervention, which is really more the system we're in today, the microbiome is one of the most extraordinary levers that we have. Everything from whether you choose to take an antibiotic, and the foods that you eat, which again, you're feeding not just your 38 trillion human cells, you're feeding another 50% of cells that do extraordinary things in your body and help it function. And so, when I think about the microbiome, it's not like, yes, I could sell everybody our product, and I'm very proud of it's the number one probiotic in the US today, and it's impacted the lives of over 1 million people, and our vaginal health work I'm very proud of. But what I hope to take away more so is the way that you eat, the way you consider this kind of other half of ourselves is an extraordinary lever. We don't have that many things we can always improve in our biology, and particularly for things that are more genetic. But the opportunity to have a lever of, and also a new framework. I think sometimes we forget that language really shapes our behavior. Yeah. And the microbiome offers us like a new language, a new way to, every time we're open a menu, every time you're about to, go grocery shopping, when you decide what fruits and vegetables and plants and, foods you want to eat, when you understand that even just acetaminophen, even just like taking Advil impacts your microbiome. When you understand how stress impacts your microbiome. And of course, I think these offer us, it offers a level of agency with a lot of more specificity than when we were, 10 years ago, it was just like, just improve your gut health. And now we're at a point where we have so much specificity and precision of so many of the things that we can do, some of which includes supplementation as well as different, probiotics.
I'm now going to, every time I eat, think about the 38 trillion bugs that I'm feeding too.
I did my job then.
Yeah, that's such an important visual. There's so many angles I want to go from there, but I think next is one of the things that's been so powerful about seed that I think has gotten you to that, number one probiotic in the country, which is, congratulations, by the way. Obviously product quality has to be number one, but also the way that you market and have built this unbelievably beautiful brand and the storytelling around it. I think a lot of that credit goes to you, and I'd love to hear a little bit about just the priority and importance you put on that when building Seed and how it's affected the success.
Yeah. Well, I think if you asked anyone that works at Seed, they would say I'm crazy. But that comes from the accountability that we feel as a company when you're selling something and telling anybody anything about their bodies or their health. And it really, I think sometimes it looks like, you're pixel pushing or you care about this one little thing, but when you don't communicate precision, it tells, you know, I don't know if you remember Giuliani's like broken window theory when he was cleaning up New York in like the 80s. It was like, if there's a broken window, you fix it, because it gives permission for there to be more broken windows otherwise. And it says, and so for us, you know, there's kind of two big things. One was the accountability and the integrity that was imbued in what we do from day zero. I don't come from the supplement industry. I don't really care too much about the industry of it. What we care about, and I think this is reflected in my co-founder and the way we've built our team, we cared about doing extraordinary science. Yeah. That was the first and foremost thing, and that's really what drove everything and continues to drive everything today. When you start from that place, then and you have some of the best scientists in the world attaching their name to a consumer company, which very rarely, at least especially at the time, very rarely happened. Every time we do something, I remind the team that these people's like academic careers are on the line. They've attached their name to a company that is in a very unregulated space and that has accountability, but most importantly, that we're putting something in somebody's body. Like I think we sometimes forget like the accountability that should come with. As far as the aesthetic and the storytelling, I remember when I first heard this quote, Sir Mark Wolpert, who was like a UK science advisor to the government, gave a climate talk in like, I think it was like the late 90s. And there was a line in his talk that said, "Science isn't finished until it's communicated." And I think we all probably feel going through COVID that that's very true. And I think the stewardship, and microbiome is interesting because it is an area it's never really happened that we have a frontier field of science that was so commercialized and consumer accessible so quickly. So again, you think about the human genome, like none of us are like like fixing my genome today. Like nobody's doing that. The microbiome is fascinating because it's like this frontier field of science that's accelerating so fast, but yet we have like, it's also an Amazon keyword that's like top ranked. And that doesn't happen in science very often. And so when we started Seed, we felt this deep, again, the accountability and responsibility to really steward how the field was communicated at scale to consumers and more public. Because when the public, and there's a lot of really interesting research on this, but public opinion shapes where funding goes. It shapes how we perceive things. I mean, there's been, there's been the negative sides of that, which is like, when Ansel Keys published like bad data and like I think it was like the late 70s, all of a sudden we demonize cholesterol for decades. These big public misunderstandings about fat, as another example, actually have huge impact. They shape our diets, they shape how and especially now with the algorithm, like it really actually shapes, what gets funded, what private and public things get funded, and it shapes opinion, it shapes the choices we make for our children. And so, for us, the brand was meant to be this kind of beacon or compass for how the microbiome could be translated, both into how you see yourself, how you make choices every day, but also the stewardship of a level of science in that field that really could be the antidote to like the gut mania and a lot of the kind of hyperbole and misinformation that gets percolates across the algorithm all the time that obviously our scientists want to like run and put their head into a wall, but we always use that as a really beautiful opportunity for education.
So,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I know you're not a doctor, but you are probably the prominent expert on gut biome in this room with Dr. Robin Burton. What are some benefits of taking seed or any probiotic that's high quality in terms of how it affects your sleep or disease prevention or things that maybe people aren't thinking about beyond just like a really good morning poop?
Well, that's one of the really good benefits, and I would say that as we think about like where we're headed, like biomarkers are going to evolve, I think, a lot with better testing and new technologies and a lot of new areas of science. But poop is like, you can say besides a great poop, but like you do have to remember that like 15% of the United States has like diagnosed IBS, and 80 million people have a GI event every single week. And actually poop is, and speaking of areas of science or areas of health that carry a lot of shame, and also carry a lot of, we've distanced ourselves from, in vaginal health, it's usually odor. And I think some of these biomarkers carry a lot of baggage. I would say poop is one of the most underrated biomarkers because it's such an easy test. Did I go? What did it look like? And there's a Bristol stool chart that was actually created. That's every poop is type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And actually, it's a beautiful. And there's new toilets now that that will start gathering more data, and the smart toilets that will start to. I mean, it's not exactly perfect because no one takes poops all the time in the same toilet, but nonetheless. There's a lot of cool.
Would love to see your photo folder.
Yeah, well, actually, you should see my text messages.
Oh God.
Yeah, you should see what people send me. A very funny side story. So we acquired this AI company out of MIT that had trained a model on 23,000 photos of poop. So that off of a photo, one of the biggest challenges, and Robin probably knows this from her practice, it's like, getting poop tests is like you have to go to the doctor, you have to get a stool test. But one of the interesting things is that AI now can look at these large data sets of images, and you can be able to start to get at least some data. Of course, it's not the same thing as sequencing fecal matter, but it's some data. And so we did a really fun campaign. We do a lot of citizen science work, and we had a big citizen science campaign called Give a Shit, #GiveAShit.
Love it.
And we in literally 2 weeks, we crowdsourced the largest image database of poop that had ever been collected in the world. One person sent us 10,000 images. It was crazy.
We should probably know who this person is.
So to show know this person, but actually it was because she has a colostomy. It was because because she had a medical condition and she needed to be recording it for so long. But what we saw, and just to go back to the bio, I will answer your question. But I don't want to just say poop is besides a good poop, because actually it's an extraordinary compass that you actually get to see, and it changes over life. I mean, any woman who's been pregnant, or you're going through menopause, or different people, stress, etc. When you travel, it changes and shifts. And so, actually, I think poop is a really, it's a way of saying what is my body working and functioning, and it's a little bit of almost like an output of what's happening inside. And I think it's a really beautiful, needs a beautiful kind of reframing. So just to say, and to speak about probiotics, saying I take a probiotic is like saying I like books. It's there's thousands of species of bacteria, maybe more, new ones being discovered all the time. The formal ISAP definition, which is the International Society of Probiotics and Prebiotics, which defined with the UN and the WHO, I think it was in early 2000s, a very specific scientific definition of what a probiotic is. And our first chief scientific officer, Dr. Gregor Reed, chaired that panel, and it reads that a probiotic is a live microorganism that, when administered in an adequate amount, confers a health benefit to the host. So if you break that down, it's a live microbe, which means you have to have it live in some capacity. It's administered in an adequate dose, which means you need to do clinical research in some capacity to determine what is the right dose. Everybody sees the billions and trillions, and we can get into the bullshit of some of that, but that is the dose. And then confers a health benefit to the host, which means it's a specific microbe that's been measured in a specific dose in a specific clinical setting to have a very specific outcome in a host, in this case, human body. When you break it down like that, you can't say I take probiotics because every microbe's different and each one is studied for very different things. In DS-01, which is our kind of flagship product, which is 24 strains, there are strains that are studied to do very specific, just to talk about pooping, there are strains that literally just trigger the neurotransmitters that control motility, that literally just make stool move through your GI tract better. That's just motility. It's just a strain that was studied very specifically for motility. So probiotics, I think the future will be all of us kind of understanding that there's a lot of specificity, and that will be very important when we look at the future of where microbial research, microbiome research is going. and especially as more probiotics become drugs, and or become very important combinatorial therapies with like chemotherapy, and certainly other drugs that are now being studied, because they have, just to use another example, just to show you the specificity. There's another microbe that is studied very specifically to impact the reuptake of cholesterol on the gut-liver axis, so reducing overall cholesterol. So that is a very specific mechanism. When you get into like skin microbiome, or for example, in our case, like vaginal microbiome, there's microbes that specifically should reside in the vaginal microbiome that play a key role in producing lactic acid, so that they can keep the microbiome of the vagina the right pH, so that it's not hospitable to certain pathogens, and it is the most optimal environment for either reproduction or other gynecological urogenital outcomes. Very specific. There's one specific type of lactobacillus that should be in the vagina. Mm-hmm. And so it just needs specificity, and it needs to be researched in that dose. And then the last piece, if you go back to the definition, which is the live piece, and the really hard thing about microbes and probiotics is how you deliver them. Mm-hmm. There's a skin microbiome. Natalie's was here. I don't know if she's still here. She gave a talk probably on skin microbiome yesterday. How you deliver microbes to the skin is very different than how you need to deliver them to the colon, for example. And so for us, like a big part of probiotics is not just what microbes are in there, but it's how do you get them alive through the GI tract. You remember the stomach and the body is a pretty tumultuous environment for live organisms, and so how do you get them through the GI tract, and how do you get them to where they need to be alive? And so that's a big part of our work, is like developing delivery technology that can preserve the microbes in a way that when they get to where they need to go in the body, they can be the most effective.
Okay, so I have two more questions before we break for Q&A. They're big, so we'll try to, get them both in. You've mentioned the algorithm. We wouldn't be a 2025 conference if we didn't talk about AI. I very well may start uploading my poop pictures to ChatGPT, by the way.
You should.
Yeah,
it's a great idea.
You and I had this great conversation in our pre-interview, which was like, it's not about kind of like over testing with like all these new technologies coming in, like, how is AI going to impact what we know about the microbiome and how we go about improving our health?
Yeah, it's I'll try and be as succinct as possible.
Yeah, I know, big question.
When I go back to my 16-year-old self, thinking about this, like these big open gaping holes in our understanding of biology and of human health, I think a lot about we obviously have genetics, we have microbiome. With microbiome comes the metabolome, which is what's being metabolized, and then all the metabolites, which in seed, that was really actually our early differentiator, was looking at the function of microbes, not which microbes, but actually looking at function and looking at their genomes. For us, microbiome is like, again, that another big part of the picture. I think the more interesting piece of where everything is headed is a bit more what they call the phenome, and really all of the observable biological traits of a human. Microbiome now being like a very important plug. And so starting to look at these large data sets and these very deep data sets where you have microbiome, where you have genomics, but you also have a lot of lifestyle data, and you have many other biomarkers, and then a lot of the newer modalities, particularly like with blood, looking at untargeted metabolomics, not just looking at some of the typical blood markers that we look at. And so you have like high resolution data correlated, kind of including microbiome, including genome or genetics, and you start to say, like, over time, and I work with a company very closely out of Israel that has the world's most comprehensive, deepest, richest human health data set. They've been building it in stealth for the last 10 years. And when you start to see what they're doing with their foundation models and what they're able to do predictively, you start to realize that right now we're in a moment of just get all the data, like literally, like so much venture capital is going into all these OpEx of all these companies to just get as much data as possible. What I'm very excited about, and I think that's a good thing because we need more data sets, The UK Biobank is another big project. A lot of the governments are doing this. UAE and Abu Dhabi is doing extraordinary things at a country level. What I'm very excited about is that what we will start to see, and I don't want to sound like Theranos, but what we will, and I even have the, anyway,
no one's gonna make that mistake,
lipstick,
don't worry.
No lipstick. What I'm really excited about is that there's gonna be a moment where we have these large enough data sets where we will have to only have a very minimum viable amount of data to have extraordinary predictive power. And when you have that, it really changes the conversation about democratization and access. I'll give you just one really interesting example, which is like very small, but it can just kind of maybe like paint one brushstroke as to like where we're headed. The company that I work with just published a foundation model that part of the data set is that they've been using voice for 10 years to track people. They can now correlate like voice with the diagnosis of sleep apnea.
Wow.
So if you can just imagine that like we will be in a moment where just using something as simple as speaking, you talk about access, you talk about democratization, you talk about the minimum amount of data that we may need in the future. It may be one vial of blood and it's the tools we're using to look at blood. It won't be that you need all this blood and all these tests. We might have very clear understandings of taking your microbiome when you're born and then storing that so that you can reintroduce your, some of the microbes that you had at birth back in, and so it's very exciting to think about how not just microbiome as data, but as part of a much larger biological picture, particularly over time, is going to really deliver us, I think, a truly predictive future of health.
That makes so much sense to me. I mean, it's incredible how much energy and love you've put into this and how it's really shifted, I think, a lot of people's knowledge of this extremely important space. And now I follow you on LinkedIn. I have for a long time. I saw this recent announcement. I don't know if anyone knows, but Ara has built a company which she can now step a little bit to the side of. She's now the chairman of the board, very active still, but has a new CEO in place. So I think congratulations for that.
Thank you.
I know a lot of company founders who want to get to that place. So how are
Happy
you?
to talk after.
Yeah, how are you feeling? Is there a what's next yet?
How do I feel is, I feel the way I think a lot of people who sit up on summit stages that I've witnessed over the years feel when they talk about like their journeys. And it's kind of a very full circle pinch me moment because you sit in the audience sometimes, at least I have for over so many years at Summit and be like, how the fuck did they do that? How do I get there? And it was probably, and I say this like kind of embarrassingly, that it was probably one of the more intentional, beautifully kind of choreographed kind of adulting that I've ever done, and it's a beautiful thing to watch something that you've created, particularly like someone else can watch the P&L, someone else can like obsess over CAC, someone else can figure out like this cohort for this clinical trial, and I get to be involved in the places that I add the most value. I think I'm also a little embarrassed to say that now being in this vantage point, there's things that I probably just should have been doing as CEO anyway, in terms of where my hands were on the wheel.
Yeah.
And so I think I see that very clearly, and I'm learning, I'm taking it in and learning for whatever's next. But it's a beautiful thing, and it was well choreographed over 2 years, and I hired the woman. And I've worked with her for over 2.5 years. Her name is Catherine Botel. She's a beautiful human, someone who became a good friend and someone I deeply, deeply trust. And it came because we co-piloted for 2.5 years together, and it was the most natural and kind of like aligned decision.
Oh, congratulations. I know it's going to be great. Okay, guys, we have 3 minutes for Q&A, so maybe we can take 3 questions. Laura?
For all of us who consider ourselves relatively healthy, what's the best way to actually measure if we're deficit in any way? What's the best way to measure if we're deficit? And for someone who has high cholesterol but feels generally healthy, can you speak a little bit more about the specifics?
Well, Robin can probably answer more about testing. We don't do testing, but I would say that there's certainly particularly with care with parsley and some of the other, I would say, more functional world. I think there's a number of tests that can give you certain information about your microbiome. Some of them are compositional, some of them are functional, like what does it do, kind of what I was saying earlier, what are they doing? There's certain markers that you can measure that are clues. I think maybe Robin would say, and a lot of clinicians would say, it's like nice data to have, but when I was if you think about that, the microbiome is involved in nearly every biological function in the human body and has a role and or relationship or bidirectional communication with almost every organ system. It is much more about actually many of the other biomarkers, and then your clinician or however you choose to get care, understanding the role that the microbiome plays in some of those areas, like whether it's inflammation, for example, which very often is correlated with some sort of dysbiosis, which is kind of microbiome fancy way of just saying kind of like out of whack in some capacity. And so we know that dysbiosis is correlated with almost every instance of systemic inflammation, in some cases even localized inflammation. And so it really is, I wish I had a great answer, and I wish so much, like at the beginning of SEED, it was so much easier if I could just say, you're just missing this kind of bacteria, and you can just put it back. It is actually not how probiotics work. Many, many probiotics are just transient. Very similar, Robin was talking about how taking magnesium, it's not like Xanax, like you have to take it every day to get the benefit. And probiotics are, for the most part, fairly transient microbes, which means that they're moving through your body, they're signaling to other microbes and they're signaling to other cells and then washing out. And if you do a washout period with a probiotic, you really very, very rarely will see a lot of those microbes, quote unquote, colonize. And so it's not really, for us at least, it's not like you're missing and put it back. It's what are all the things you can do to enrich diet, probably being one of the most critical levers, probiotics being, and prebiotics being another one, that you can do to enrich that ecology so that it can kind of come back to stasis and healthy functioning. And I know it's not the best answer, because I wish it was like the biology worked that simply of like, it's not like vitamin D, unfortunately, so.
Take SEED, lower cholesterol. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more if they let us go over. Yeah?
Are you looking at peptides as a possible influence on the microbiome? And if so, could you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, very, very much so. We actually got asked recently to participate in a couple GLP-1 trials, combinatorially with a couple new drugs that are in development, a couple that are on the market that are also continuing to build out their claims and understand their efficacy. We work with, so Dr. Sarkis Mazmanian, who's at Caltech, who's probably one of the more prominent gut-brain researchers in the world. We do a lot of work with him looking at, and I think by peptides you mean more GLP. Yeah, for us we've been more focused on the GLP-1 world because microbiome is so critical and key to satiety signaling, and whether that gut-brain connection is a lot of how that communication pathway plays such a key role in being satiated, like knowing that you're satiated, and obviously in appetite control. And your microbes have a big role in the foods you crave. So you feed them bad stuff, they want more bad stuff, and it opportunistically kind of feeds the ones you don't want necessarily taking over. And so a lot of our work has been more in looking at gut-brain, and then how probiotics and particularly prebiotics could play a role with GLP-1s. There's a lot of other work being done in microbiome on peptides, but it's not like a huge focus for us. But obviously, of course, it comes up all the time. But predominantly, we focus on the gut-brain piece with GLP-1s.
So I've just been told we're out of time, but Ara's not going anywhere in terms of this weekend, I don't think. So you guys can find her. And Ara, thank you so much for giving us all this amazing information.